This is it, the ultimate dimension for rest and stories, and it's called Sleepy Myths.
Hey there, traveler. We're so grateful you're here tonight.
This story is for you. A quiet journey through infinite worlds, meant to calm your thoughts, slow your heartbeat, and remind you that even in the vastness of everything, you matter. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it there? Go ahead, drop a comment below. And if this gentle story helps you drift a little easier tonight, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales that whisper you to sleep. Your support helps us create more worlds, more memories, more dreams. Now, grab your coffee, get cozy, pull the blankets close, let your breathing slow.
Let's begin. There's a sound beneath infinity. It isn't loud, not the kind of sound that wakes stars or shakes planets.
It's more like a hum, low and steady, the kind that hides under everything alive. Rick Sanchez heard it in his dream. He stood in an endless space made of fractured stars, each shard glinting with the memory of a world he'd once visited and then forgotten. The hum grew deeper. The light shimmered through his hair like soft static. Every version of himself, thousands, millions, stood around him in a slow, spiraling pattern, each one whispering the same word through the cosmic air. Home. Rick woke up with that word clinging to him like gravity. The lab was dark. The portal window flickered faint green, casting sleepy reflections on scattered tools and forgotten inventions. Morty was asleep in the corner, his face half buried in a jacket, mumbling softly to a dream only he could hear. Rick sat up, rubbing his eyes. The dream still trembled in the edges of his mind. Stars like broken glass, and that word echoing in a dozen tones of regret. Home. He walked toward the cracked portal window, the one that opened to nothing now. Through it shimmered a dim slice of the multiverse, fractured lights drifting like dust motes in a vacuum. He stared into it the way one stares into their reflection, too long, trying to remember who they were before they learned not to care. Footsteps stirred behind him. "Rick!" Morty's voice came, low and uncertain, still thick with sleep. "You're up late again." Rick didn't look back. "You ever hear a sound in your dreams, Morty?"
Something that ain't supposed to be there.
Morty blinked, rubbing his eyes.
Like music?
"More like the universe trying to hum itself back together." Rick sighed.
It's weird.
"I don't usually dream." Morty came to stand beside him, looking out the cracked portal. The colors rippled like soft water, purple melting into teal, stars blurring into each other until they looked almost alive.
It's kind of beautiful, Morty whispered. Rick grunted softly, half smiling.
"Yeah, guess even entropy has good lighting." For a while they just stood there, two tired souls on the edge of infinite worlds, not saying much. The silence wasn't heavy. It was gentle. Like the world itself had finally decided to stop rushing. Morty tilted his head.
"Rick, what if there's like a version of us that's done, like not adventuring anymore?"
"Just resting." Rick's eyelids lowered, thoughtful.
Wouldn't that be something? He tapped the cracked portal frame.
It buzzed weakly. "Yeah, half asleep like him." "Morty, grab your coat. We're going for a ride." "Now?" Rick looked at him, eyes distant but soft. "Now's the only time that ever really exists, kid." Morty hesitated, then smiled. That small, trusting smile he always gave before a new journey. Even if he didn't understand, he followed. Rick adjusted the coordinates, though this time the numbers didn't mean what they used to. They weren't aiming for adventure or danger. He wasn't sure what he was searching for. Maybe quiet, maybe closure, maybe that hum from his dream. He only knew the feeling, that soft ache of curiosity mixed with peace, the way nostalgia sometimes feels like love. The portal opened with a low sigh, not the usual burst of color. This one was calm, like moonlight through water. Rick and Morty stepped inside, and for a moment, the entire multiverse seemed to hold its breath. As they drifted through, the narrator's voice, my voice, slows. We can see them suspended in the shimmer between universes, their outlines made of memory and possibility. Rick's coat ripples in the gravityless wind. Morty's reflection appears in infinite shards around him, millions of versions blinking in quiet awe. "Where are we going, Rick?" Rick's voice came soft, almost melodic. Nowhere special, just seeing what's left. The hum returned, faint but there, beneath everything. It wasn't mechanical this time.
It sounded alive, the low vibration of creation remembering itself. Morty closed his eyes, letting it pass through him. "It's nice," he whispered.
"Feels like when you're about to fall asleep and you don't know where your thoughts go." Rick chuckled gently. "That's the best part of existence, Morty, the drift." The portal light dimmed as they passed through. Outside, the stars blurred into long lines, then into soft mist. The multiverse unfolded like the inside of an old song. For once, Rick didn't rush to measure it. He didn't scan or analyze or comment on the physics of it all. He just watched, quiet, humbled by the beauty of something too gentle to explain. Maybe that was Evil Morty's trick all along, he thought. Maybe he wasn't trying to break the system. Maybe he was trying to make it sleep. The hum deepened, soft, endless, like the universe breathing in. Rick looked at Morty, and for a moment there was peace between them. No lessons, no lectures, just stillness, and somewhere, beyond the veil of all realities, a faint echo of laughter. One that might have been Evil Morty's, though softer now. Tired, almost kind. The hum faded. The portal light cooled to silver. Rick exhaled slowly, his voice nearly a whisper. "You hear that, Morty?" Morty tilted his head. "Yeah. It's like the stars are singing," Rick nodded, eyes distant. "Maybe they finally got something to say worth listening to." And so they drifted, quietly, into the folds of the unknown. Two travelers wrapped in starlight, chasing not adventure, but rest. The sound beneath infinity followed them. A promise, a hum, a heartbeat of all things that have ever dared to dream. The hum faded as the portal slowed, and the colors folded gently into stillness. They emerged not into chaos or fire, but into silence, a kind of silence that felt ancient, as though the air itself had grown tired of being heard. The citadel floated before them, suspended in dim starlight. Once it had been a monument to infinite Ricks, towers of glass and steel spiraling upward, full of voices, laughter, arguments, and endless experiments. Now it drifted like a forgotten thought. Its lights flickered softly, like dying fireflies caught between breaths. Morty stepped forward first, his boots making the faintest echo against the metal floor. The sound disappeared almost immediately, swallowed by the vast emptiness. Rick followed, his portal gun lowered, his eyes strangely calm. He didn't speak, and for once, Morty didn't try to fill the silence. The corridors stretched endlessly. Posters hung in tatters, corners curling, faces of Ricks and Mortys smiling from a time that no longer remembered itself. A single monitor flickered weakly, playing static where once the council's decrees blared with authority. Dust drifted in the air, glimmering like lost stars. Morty ran his fingers along a cracked wall.
"I thought there'd still be people here," Rick shook his head.
"There were too many of us, Morty. Too much of the same thing. Eventually, even infinity gets bored." They passed a cafeteria where tables were overturned, chairs rusting, trays still half filled with what might have been lunch from another era. The walls hummed faintly, an echo of the old machines still trying to keep the citadel alive. Morty's voice broke the quiet again, hesitant.
"It's weird. It's like..."
"We built a whole universe just to prove we could exist."
"And then everyone just left." Rick's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. That's what existence does, Morty. It builds and forgets. Builds and forgets.
It's how time keeps itself busy. They turned a corner, entering what had once been the council chamber. Rows of shattered glass circled the high dome where great decisions had once been made. Rick stepped into the center, looking up at the empty ceiling where his reflection should have been.
Instead, he saw nothing, just a faint pulse of light, like the Citadel's heart, still trying to beat. Morty watched him.
"You okay?" Rick didn't answer immediately. He took a slow breath. This place used to mean something. Control, order, ego. Guess it all rusts the same in the end. Morty smiled faintly.
Yeah, but
Maybe that's not a bad thing.
maybe it's better this way. Rick turned to look at him.
You're starting to sound like me, Morty. Maybe I'm starting to sound like you used to be, Morty said quietly. Rick chuckled softly, shaking his head. Touché, they continued deeper. Along the way, they passed old laboratories, rooms where experiments had once crackled with electric light, now still as forgotten dreams. One room held a chalkboard covered in half-finished equations. Rick paused, tracing a line of symbols with his finger. "These were mine," he murmured. "Or one of mine." "Funny how even the smartest people forget what they were trying to prove." Morty tilted his head. "What were you trying to prove?" Rick smiled sadly. "That I wasn't afraid of forever." The answer hung in the air like dust. They reached the command center, a wide circular room filled with broken screens.
Only one still glowed faintly. A symbol pulsed on its cracked surface, a simple golden eye. Evil Morty's insignia. Rick froze.
The glow flickered once, twice, then stabilized. A voice, faint and distorted, played through the static.
"If you're reading this..."
"You still care." The words echoed through the room, gentle, tired, more like a whisper than a warning. Morty looked at Rick. "It's him."
"He left this." Rick didn't reply.
He just stared at the screen as though it had opened some forgotten part of him. The silence between them felt alive now, the kind of silence that carries meaning. Evil Morty's voice continued, soft and slow. "You don't have to chase me."
"I'm not hiding. I'm done with hiding."
"I built this place to show you what obsession looks like when it grows old. You can leave now, or you can listen." The recording ended. The screen dimmed. The hum of the Citadel filled the void, deeper now, like the building itself was breathing. Rick exhaled. "Well, that's new." Morty frowned. "What do you think he meant?" Rick leaned back against the console. "He means exactly what it sounds like. He's not fighting anymore."
"He's just..."
"Talking." Morty glanced around. "But to who?" Rick gave a faint smile. "To anyone still awake." They sat there for a while, not moving. Outside, the Citadel drifted through the starlight, quiet, weightless, ancient. Every sound, the creak of metal, the faint hum of the monitors, even their breathing, felt amplified by the emptiness. And yet it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful, like the afterglow of a long-forgotten song. Morty leaned against the wall, eyes half closed.
"It's weird, Rick. I don't even feel scared here."
"Just small," Rick nodded. "That's good, Morty. Small's the right size for the truth." He looked once more at the dim monitor. The golden eye glowed faintly, then faded into black.
A thought crossed his mind, not scientific, not logical, just deeply human.
Maybe Evil Morty wasn't trying to escape. Maybe he was trying to teach them how to stop running. Rick turned to Morty. "Get some rest, kid. We'll follow his trail in the morning." Morty yawned. "You think he's watching us?" Rick smirked, eyes soft. "If he is, I hope he's laughing." The lights of the Citadel pulsed once more, as if in response, not mockery, not warning. Just acknowledgement. Rick lay down on the cold floor, arms behind his head. Morty curled up beside him, the glow of distant stars flickering through broken glass. Above them, The citadel's central dome opened to the sky, and a slow drift of light poured in, like dawn made of memory. They didn't speak again. The air was too calm, too sacred in its silence. Somewhere beyond, universes spun, portals opened and closed, and infinity continued its endless work. But here, inside the empty citadel, time exhaled. The citadel slept. And for the first time in a long while, so did Rick. Some places never truly die. They just grow quiet enough to listen. The hum of the citadel was gone when Rick woke. In its place was something softer. The quiet rhythm of drifting air, the slow creak of forgotten metal, and Morty's gentle breathing beside him. For a moment Rick didn't move. He lay still, eyes tracing the faint glow of the stars above, each one flickering like a thought, struggling to be remembered. Morning wasn't real out here, but something like it had arrived. A subtle brightness, the way cosmic light seeps into broken glass. Rick sat up, rubbed his eyes, and stared into the hollow of the room. The air felt charged again. Not alive exactly, but aware, like the citadel knew they were still here. Morty stirred, blinking.
You slept?
Rick smirked faintly. Didn't mean to. Guess even geniuses short-circuit sometimes. Morty smiled, pulling himself upright. It's weird seeing you quiet.
You're usually like...
Plotting or ranting by now. Rick looked away. Yeah, well, turns out silence is cheaper than therapy. The citadel groaned softly as if responding, a deep vibration echoing through its frame. Rick rose and walked toward the old console again. The monitor was dead, but something shimmered beneath the cracked glass. A faint, golden thread of light winding through the circuitry like veins beneath skin.
It pulsed softly, almost breathing. Morty, Rick said.
Grab the auxiliary link. Morty shuffled through the debris, found a cable, and plugged it in. The monitor flared to life. The golden eye reappeared. Not as a symbol now, but as a map. Except it wasn't a normal map. It looked like a star field drawn in dream logic. Points of light connected by faint golden lines that shifted and rearranged as they watched. Each point pulsed like a heartbeat. Morty whispered, "What is it?" Rick stared. A cartography of possibility.
I've seen something like this before.
But not made by me. By who, then? Rick hesitated. By him. The golden eye blinked once, and then, impossibly, a voice emerged, soft and distant, like a memory being replayed underwater. Every decision leaves a shadow.
Every escape leaves a trace.
I'm not running anymore, Rick. I'm mapping the things we forgot, Morty swallowed.
That's him, right? Evil Morty?
Rick nodded slowly, eyes locked on the map. He's building something new.
A world that doesn't revolve around us. The lights on the map shifted, drawing lines between three pulsing points.
Rick zoomed in. The map responded to his thought, zooming deeper until the shapes became galaxies, then stars, then strange, looping patterns like sound waves. Morty frowned. That doesn't look like space. Rick's tone softened. It's not.
It's memory.
The kind that sticks to places long after people leave. Morty blinked. Wait, memories can...
have coordinates?
Rick smiled faintly. When you've lived long enough, everything does. The map pulsed again, and a faint whisper echoed through the room. Fragments of voices, laughter, crying, conversations half remembered. Some were theirs. Some weren't. It was as though every version of Rick and Morty that ever existed had left tiny imprints in the void. And now, Evil Morty had stitched them together into a kind of living atlas. Morty's eyes widened.
This is us, all of us. Rick watched quietly, his jaw tightening. He's building meaning out of madness.
Damn poetic for a sociopath, Morty frowned. You don't sound mad, Rick didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulling out a small silver device, a recorder, old and scratched. He pressed a button, and static filled the air. I started keeping notes years ago, he said softly. Not about science.
About moments.
The kind you can't recreate in a lab. He turned the recorder off, then pocketed it again. Evil Morty's doing the same thing, but on a cosmic scale.
Mapping emotions instead of equations. Morty's voice trembled with awe. Like a dream map.
Rick looked at him. Exactly. A map made of dreams. The golden lights rearranged again, forming a spiral that looked almost alive. At the center, a single word appeared, written in bright, handwritten script. Origin. Rick's breath caught.
That's new? Morty tilted his head.
Origin, like where everything started? Rick's voice dropped lower, distant. Maybe not everything, but maybe where we started. For a moment neither spoke. The citadel's lights dimmed. The stars beyond seemed to stretch closer, listening. Finally, Rick pressed his hand against the glowing screen. The map reacted, a ripple of gold spreading outward like the surface of a calm sea. Morty whispered, "What's happening?" Rick smiled faintly. "It's showing us the way." A beam of golden light extended from the screen, cutting through the chamber and forming a small, floating ring of energy. A portal, but not one Rick had ever built. It shimmered quietly, humming in a low, harmonic tone that felt less mechanical and more alive. Morty's eyes widened.
That's not your tech, is it?
Rick shook his head.
No, it's his. But it's...
Clean, gentle, almost like it wants to be trusted. Morty hesitated. So, what do we do? Rick exhaled slowly. We follow it. But not to fight him this time. Then what for? Rick turned to Morty, eyes softer than they'd been in years. To understand what he saw that we didn't. Morty nodded quietly.
You think he's trying to teach us something?
Rick chuckled.
Kid, the universe doesn't teach.
It just repeats until you finally start listening. He holstered the portal gun but didn't raise it. Instead, he simply stepped forward into the golden ring of light. The air shimmered around him, wrapping him in warmth. Not heat, but familiarity, like walking into an old memory. Morty took one last glance around the citadel, its towers now glowing faintly, like they were saying goodbye, and followed. As the portal closed, the citadel exhaled one final sound, a deep, low note that lingered long after everything else had gone still, and beyond the shimmer of gold. The two travelers drifted into somewhere between dream and design, a place where the multiverse folded into memory, and memory whispered softly of home. Some journeys begin when you stop trying to arrive, and some maps only appear when you've finally closed your eyes. The light of the portal dimmed as Rick and Morty stepped through. The hum that had followed them for so long, that constant electronic whisper of the multiverse, fell away like a breath finally exhaled. Silence. Not empty, but vast. A silence so deep it felt alive. They emerged into a sky the color of sleep, clouds moving slow as thoughts, a pale sun flickering faintly as if remembering how to shine. There were no stars, no sounds, not even wind, only a soft shimmer in the distance, as though the horizon were made of glass. Morty looked around, wide-eyed.
Rick, where are we?
Rick took a long moment before answering. He adjusted the collar of his coat, stared at the endless sky, and said, "A universe that forgot itself." Morty frowned. "What does that mean?" Rick squinted at the faint glow in the clouds. "Every world runs on memory, Morty. Physics, matter, consciousness, all just patterns remembering themselves over and over again."
But this place...
It stopped remembering. Morty blinked. "You mean like it has amnesia?" Rick gave a faint, weary smile.
Something like that.
"Every atom here used to know what it was. Now it just drifts." They walked for a while, though walking wasn't the right word. The ground didn't feel like ground. It was more like soft light underfoot, solid only because they believed it was. As they moved forward, fragments of something began to appear in the distance. Shapes half real, like dreams that hadn't finished forming. A house without walls, a tree made of shadows, a staircase that led nowhere. Morty shivered. It's like the universe is trying to remember what things used to look like. Rick nodded quietly. Or who used to live here? For a long time, they walked in silence. The still air seemed to listen. Each of their footsteps echoed faintly like small ripples in a sleeping lake. And then, a sound. Soft, like petals brushing glass. Morty turned. There, beyond a veil of mist, stood a garden, if you could call it that. Flowers made of echo and light drifted in the air, their petals translucent and weightless. Each one pulsed gently, releasing tiny rings of sound instead of scent. Whispers of laughter, fragments of songs, faint echoes of forgotten days. In the middle of the garden stood a woman tending to the flowers. She was older, gentle-looking, her hair catching the dim light like fading gold. Morty's heart skipped. Summer? Rick froze. The woman turned.
And yes, it was Summer.
Or someone who remembered being her. Hey, she said softly.
You found me, Morty blinked. What happened to you?
She smiled in that way people do when they've already made peace with the answer. Nothing happened.
I just stayed behind when the rest of the universe moved on. Rick's voice was barely audible. You're a variant, Summer nodded. I was. Then the memories faded.
I decided to stay in what was left. Morty looked around the silent garden.
You made all this?
Summer glanced at the echo flowers.
I know, they made themselves. I just take care of them. Rick stepped closer, inspecting one of the glowing blossoms.
Ethereal sound forms stabilized by ambient consciousness. Huh. Summer chuckled softly. Still explaining everything, huh? Rick looked away. Old habits? Morty walked between the flowers, listening. Each whisper seemed to carry a feeling. Joy, regret, laughter, all the things that make a life feel like a life. One petal brushed his cheek, and for a moment he saw something. Evil Morty, younger, sitting beneath a tree, humming to himself. Peaceful. Morty gasped.
I saw him, Summer nodded.
He passed through not long ago, Rick's eyes snapped to her. What did he want? Summer shook her head. Nothing. That was the strange part. He wasn't running anymore.
He wasn't angry, he just
walked through the silence like he belonged here. Rick frowned deeply, the lines in his face tightening. What did he say? She hesitated, then looked directly at him.
He said he was done fighting shadows, Morty blinked.
Shadows? Summer plucked one of the echo flowers, holding it gently in her hand. It flickered, showing glimpses of countless Mortys, laughing, crying, dying, surviving, all repeating endlessly. He said we all live in reflections, she murmured. And he was tired of being one. Rick's voice grew soft, almost fragile. So he came here to forget? Summer looked at him kindly.
No, Rick, he came here to forgive. The silence thickened.
Even the echo flowers seemed to pause their whispering. Morty swallowed hard. Forgive who? Summer smiled faintly.
You maybe, himself, maybe everyone. Rick said nothing.
His eyes were on the horizon, where the glassy sky met the sleeping clouds. Summer stepped closer to him. He left something behind for you. From her pocket, she drew a small sphere of light, no bigger than a marble, pulsing softly. Rick reached for it, but she didn't hand it over right away. He said, she whispered, that you'd only see it clearly when you stopped trying to understand it. Rick's hand trembled slightly as he took it. Yeah, he muttered, that sounds like him. The light pulsed once, bright and warm, then dimmed, settling into Rick's palm like a heartbeat at rest. Summer turned back to her garden. He told me he was heading toward the end of the dream. Rick looked up sharply. The end of the dream? She nodded. He said that's where freedom lives. Morty shivered.
That sounds kind of final. Summer smiled gently.
All endings are just places where we stop needing beginnings, the silence returned. Rick and Morty stood there a while longer, watching the echo flowers shimmer, each one releasing tiny fragments of forgotten laughter into the still air. When they finally turned to leave, Summer called after them. "Tell him I understand now," she said, softly. "Tell him I'm not afraid anymore." Rick nodded once, not looking back. "You just did." And then as they stepped into the mist again, the garden faded, not disappearing, but folding quietly into memory, like a dream slipping beneath the surface of sleep. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel empty, it felt gentle. As they walked on, the pulse of the light in Rick's hand kept perfect time with their footsteps, a quiet reminder that somewhere beyond memory, Evil Morty was still walking too. Some universes don't end with noise or collapse. They end when their last dreamer finally learns to rest. Rick didn't dream often anymore. When he did, his dreams came in fragments, equations without answers, galaxies folding into themselves, and faces he'd forgotten how to name. But that night, as the ship drifted through the silent current between dimensions, something found him, a sound, faint but familiar, the quiet hum of a child's voice, humming, softly, as if to himself. Morty slept beside him, curled up in his seat, the faint reflection of distant stars trembling across his face. Rick sat there, staring at the sphere of light Summer had given him. It pulsed faintly, like a living memory. He turned it over in his hands, muttering, "You always did know how to make an exit, didn't you?" The sphere flickered, and suddenly the silence shifted. Rick blinked. The cockpit faded, and he was standing in a room he hadn't seen in decades, a schoolroom. Old chalkboards lined the walls, covered in unfinished equations. The smell of dust and rain lingered in the air. And there, sitting alone at a desk near the window, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 10. Round glasses, brown hair falling into his eyes, a look of quiet focus, too serious for his age. Rick recognized him instantly. Not the evil Morty the universe whispered about, not the schemer, the manipulator, the boy who tore holes through infinity. Just a kid. Rick's throat tightened.
"So this is it, huh?" "Memory lane." The boy didn't look up.
He was drawing, not words, not machines, but circles. Hundreds of them, small and perfect, filling the page like ripples on still water. Rick stepped closer. "What you working on, sport?" The boy paused his drawing but didn't speak. Rick knelt beside him. "You know who I am?" The boy shrugged. "You're one of them," Rick frowned. "One of who?" The boy finally looked up. His eyes were calm, too calm. "The ones who never stop running," Rick froze. The boy gestured toward the page of circles. "That's what it looks like, you know. You run and it makes waves."
"Every version of you running, running, running."
But the ripples never stop. They just...
"Keep going." Rick tried to laugh, but the sound came out brittle.
"You're a pretty heavy thinker for a kid." The boy smiled faintly.
"I had to be." The silence stretched between them.
Dust floated in the air like lazy snow. Rick sat on the edge of the desk.
"So what made you stop?"
The boy looked down at the page again.
"I didn't stop.
The universe did.
One day I realized I was tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep."
The kind where you stop wanting to prove anything." Rick felt a chill run through him.
"That's
Not how things work, kid. You stop moving, you stop existing." The boy's pencil traced another circle. Slow, deliberate. "Maybe that's what you're afraid of." Rick said nothing. The boy continued softly. "You built an infinite world just to avoid the silence between thoughts. But the silence isn't your enemy, Rick. It's the only thing that ever listened." Rick stared at him, this small, impossibly self-assured version of Morty. And for the first time, he felt something old and heavy stirring in his chest. He remembered the day he met his first Morty, a nervous kid with too much heart and not enough armor. He remembered the way he'd laughed it off when the boy cried. He remembered the walls he'd built around every version since, brick by brick, arrogance by arrogance, and Somewhere inside him, he heard the echo of the boy's words again. You never stop running. Rick looked at the paper full of circles. So what did you do when you figured it out? The boy set down his pencil.
I stopped, Rick frowned.
Stopped what?
Everything. The boy turned to the window where soft golden light spilled across the floor.
I stopped trying to win, to fix, to escape.
I just sat still and listened to the hum beneath everything. Rick raised an eyebrow.
A hum beneath everything? The boy nodded. You've heard it before. You just never listened long enough? Rick opened his mouth to argue. But then he heard it. A low, resonant vibration, softer than sound, running through the air, the walls, the space between atoms. It wasn't noise. It was memory. It was every heartbeat, every breath, every spark of life, all playing the same quiet note. The boy whispered, It's what holds everything together. The sound of the universe not trying so hard. And somewhere inside him, he heard the echo of the boy's words again. You never stop running. Rick looked at the paper, full of circles. So what did you do when you figured it out? The boy set down his pencil.
I stopped, Rick frowned.
Stopped what?
Everything. The boy turned to the window,
where soft golden light spilled across the floor. I stopped trying to win, to fix, to escape.
I just sat still and listened to the hum beneath everything. Rick raised an eyebrow.
The hum beneath everything? The boy nodded. You've heard it before. You just never listened long enough. Rick opened his mouth to argue, but then he heard it. A low, resonant vibration, softer than sound, running through the air, the walls, the space between atoms. It wasn't noise. It was memory. It was every heartbeat, every breath, every spark of life, all playing the same quiet note. The boy whispered, It's what holds everything together. The sound of the universe not trying so hard. Rick swallowed hard. So that's your big revelation, huh? Sit still and listen. The boy smiled. It's not much of a plan, but it's bigger than the last one. Rick chuckled softly, then sighed.
Kid, you're a weird mix of me and him.
Too much brain, too much heart. The boy tilted his head.
That's why I'm still here. Rick hesitated. You blame me?
For how he turned out? The boy shook his head. No, I think you both built each other.
One out of guilt.
The other out of hope. Rick leaned back, staring at the light spilling through the window.
Hope, huh? Haven't heard that word in a while. The boy smiled faintly.
It's still out there. It just got tired of waiting for you. The hum deepened, warm, infinite, peaceful. The classroom began to dissolve. The desk, the walls, even the boy's outline shimmered like glass turning to mist. Rick reached out.
Wait, the boy's voice came from everywhere at once, calm and steady.
If you stop running long enough, you'll find me again, not as a ghost.
As a choice. Then silence. Rick woke with a start.
The ship was dark except for the faint glow of the sphere in his hand. Morty was still asleep, breathing softly, his face calm. Rick looked out the window, at the endless field of stars beyond. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was falling through them. He felt still. He whispered, almost to himself, If I stop running, maybe the universe will too. The sphere pulsed once. Bright and gentle. As if agreeing, Rick leaned back in his seat, eyes half closed, the hum of infinity faintly audible in the background. And in that strange, weightless silence, something in him finally began to rest. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't escaping your past, it's forgiving it enough to stop running. There's a place between dimensions where time doesn't move. It only breathes. Rick once called it temporal drift zero. Evil Morty had another name for it. He called it home. The ship floated soundlessly through that nowhere sky, its hull glowing faintly against a sea of frozen starlight. The universe outside wasn't black or blue, it was the color of stillness. The kind of silence that made clocks nervous. Morty stirred awake.
Where are we, Rick? Rick didn't answer at first.
He just stared through the glass, a cigarette dangling unlit between his fingers. "Nowhere that needs fixing," he said finally.
And that's saying something. Morty sat up, rubbing his eyes. You look weirdly calm. Are we dead again?
Rick snorted. "Not yet. Though if this place had a pulse, I wouldn't bet against it being flatlined." The ship drifted toward a structure, a massive metallic tower hanging in space like an abandoned cathedral. Its spire stretched upward into nothingness, vanishing into the fog of time itself. Around it floated shards of broken gears and glass, suspended mid-turn, mid-tick. A clock, infinite and broken, trying to remember what movement felt like. Morty whispered, "It's beautiful." Rick muttered, "It's a paradox. That's the nice way of saying it's a lie." They landed at the base. The ground shimmered like mercury beneath their boots.
No sound, no wind, no sense of forward or back.
Just the soft vibration of existence holding its breath. Rick opened a small device on his wrist. The screen glitched and spun.
"Figures," he grumbled.
"You can't measure time in a place that doesn't believe in it." Morty followed close behind. "So why are we here?" Rick turned to him, his face half lit by the pale glow of the tower. "Because Evil Morty wants me to see something."
"This!" He gestured upward. "This is his idea of a joke." Morty frowned.
"What kind of joke?" "The kind where the punchline takes a lifetime to understand." They entered the tower. Inside, the air felt heavy, like walking underwater. Every sound stretched thin, every echo lasted longer than it should have. The walls were lined with thousands of clock faces, all missing their hands. Each ticked silently, waiting for something that would never come. Morty shivered.
"This place feels..."
"Wrong?" Rick glanced at one of the clocks. His reflection flickered in the glass, older somehow. Not the man he was, but the man he'd been trying to outrun. He swallowed hard. "It's not wrong."
"It's honest."
"That's what makes it worse." At the far end of the corridor stood a door.
Unlike everything else, it moved.
Slowly, deliberately, as if breathing. Rick pressed his hand to it. It opened, and there he was, Evil Morty, standing in the center of the chamber, surrounded by light. Not bright, but ancient. He wore no eye patch now. His face was calm, almost serene. He looked at Rick the way one looks at an old photograph, familiar but distant. "Hello, Rick," he said softly.
"You finally made it." Morty stepped back. "Oh God, it's him!" "Rick, we should..." Rick raised a hand.
"Relax, kid. If he wanted us dead, we'd be déjà vu by now." Evil Morty smiled faintly. "You always did know how to read a room." He turned toward the tower's center, a massive clock, taller than worlds, completely still.
"This is the core of everything that ever tried to measure time," he said.
"Every version of it, human, alien, divine, all the ways we've tried to count existence." Rick frowned.
"And you broke it." "I freed it," Evil Morty corrected.
"You think time's supposed to move forward. But forward is just a word you invented to make chaos digestible," Morty blinked. "Wait, what do you mean freed it?" Evil Morty walked closer, his voice quiet but sharp. "Rick's universe is built on control, equations, logic, cause and effect. But what happens when you remove the need for the next moment? When you stop chasing the next drink, the next fix, the next escape?" He turned to Rick. "You stop being a scientist. You start being..."
"Alive." Rick's jaw tightened.
"You sound like a self-help pamphlet written by Entropy," Evil Morty chuckled. "You still hide behind jokes. But we both know you heard the hum. You felt it." Rick's eyes flickered. "You were in my head, weren't you? That classroom, the circles, that was you." Evil Morty shook his head.
"No, that was you."
"A part of you that stopped pretending everything's meaningless." Morty looked between them, confused. "Rick, what's he talking about?" Rick sighed. "He's talking about giving up the illusion of control. You destroy enough universes and suddenly the idea of fate starts sounding cozy." Evil Morty stepped forward. "You call it giving up?"
"I call it acceptance." The great clock behind him began to tremble. the faintest sound, like the first heartbeat after an eternity of silence. Rick took a step back. "What the hell did you do?" "I stopped measuring," Evil Morty whispered.
"And now the universe is remembering how to be." The tower shuddered. All around them the clocks began to breathe.
Not tick, breathe.
Each pulse sending waves of soft gold through the air. Morty grabbed Rick's arm.
"Rick, we need to leave."
Rick didn't move. His eyes were locked on the boy, the man, standing before him, calm amid the chaos.
"Why show me this?"
he demanded. "Why now?" Evil Morty smiled, that same quiet, knowing smile from the classroom. "Because you're the only one who still believes broken things can't be beautiful." Then the light consumed him. When it faded, the chamber was empty. The tower was silent once more. Only Rick and Morty remained, standing before the great clock, now motionless again. Morty looked around.
"Is he gone?"
Rick exhaled slowly. "No, he's everywhere." Time decided to stop pretending. He looked up at the clock, its face cracked but peaceful. And for the first time in his life, Rick Sanchez didn't feel the need to fix it. He turned to Morty. "Let's go home." They drifted for hours, or maybe centuries. Time, in the still dimension, had dissolved into a kind of slow breath. Rick didn't say a word. Morty didn't ask. The silence between them felt full, not empty, like the pause between two notes that once knew how to sing together. Outside the ship, reality folded gently, waves of light curving inward, each ripple forming the reflection of another, a hall of mirrors stretching beyond infinity. Morty leaned toward the glass.
"Rick, what is that?"
Rick squinted. His eyes reflected back 1,000 times, old, tired, and suddenly small. "Mirrored strata," he murmured.
"A memory echo."
Dimensions reflecting each other until they forget which one was first. Morty pressed a hand against the viewport.
It's copying us." Rick adjusted the ship's stabilizer. "Not copying, kid. Remembering." As they drifted deeper, the reflections grew clearer. No longer just echoes of metal and stars, but shapes, figures, people. Morty gasped. "Wait, that's me!"
In one mirror he saw himself, smiling, brave, confident, a version of Morty that never flinched, never hesitated, never let Rick carry all the weight. And beside that reflection was another Morty, older, quieter, eyes kind but tired, looking back with something that felt like love. Rick muttered, "Oh, for crying out loud," and turned away. It's a mirrorverse, probably projecting your subconscious or some pseudo-psychic nonsense. But even he didn't sound convinced. The reflections shimmered, their lips moving in silence. Morty stepped closer.
"Rick, I think it's saying something."
Then the ship went still. Every reflection froze, except one. A single Morty made entirely of golden light stepped out from the mirror and into the room. Morty stumbled backward.
Oh, geez, what is happening?" Rick reached for his portal gun, then stopped.
The air around the glowing figure wasn't hostile. It was gentle. The mirror, Morty smiled, not with confidence, but with peace. His voice was soft, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "I didn't want to win," he said.
"I wanted to rest," Morty blinked. "What?"
Mirror Morty looked at him, at both of them. "You've been running for so long you forgot what stillness feels like." Evil Morty learned that before any of us. Rick's tone hardened. "You know him?" "I am him," the reflection said. "Or maybe the part of him that finally stopped being angry." The real Morty stepped closer, voice trembling. "You're saying you're his memory?" Mirror Morty nodded.
"His memory, his dream, his echo."
"The part he left behind to tell you the truth he couldn't say himself." Rick crossed his arms. "And what truth is that, huh? That we're all just another metaphor for trauma?" That every version of us is doomed to the same cosmic therapy session? The reflection smiled faintly. No, the truth is simpler than you think, Rick. He didn't want to destroy you. He wanted to free you, Morty frowned. Free us from what? From the need to matter. Rick flinched. Barely, but it was there. Mirror Morty continued, his voice like a quiet current. He saw the infinite Ricks building infinite universes to avoid feeling small. He saw the Mortys breaking under the weight of all that genius. He realized the only real rebellion wasn't to escape. It was to stop. Rick's hand trembled slightly. Stop what? Running, the reflection said. From yourselves, the ship creaked. The mirrors outside began to pulse with slow golden light, as if the universe itself were exhaling. Morty looked at his luminous counterpart. You mean he found peace? Mirror Morty's smile deepened. He found something better. Understanding. The multiverse doesn't need saving. It just needs someone to forgive it for existing. Rick's voice was low, almost breaking. And you think that's what he wanted me to do? Mirror Morty turned to him, his eyes full of something human. No, Rick. He wanted you to forgive yourself. Silence. The kind that wasn't empty, but sacred. Morty stepped closer, his expression soft. Rick, maybe that's what all this is about. Not the portals. Not the science. Just, I don't know, learning to stop being scared of peace. Rick stared at the floor. You sound like him, Morty smiled sadly. Maybe I finally get him. The mirror Morty began to fade, his light scattering like dust caught in sunlight. Before disappearing completely, he placed something on the console, a small glass fragment. Inside it flickered an image, a field under two suns. Evil Morty standing there, looking at a distant horizon, smiling. Rick reached out and touched the glass. For the first time in his life, he didn't analyze it. He just looked. The reflection whispered, You don't have to keep the portal gun anymore. The way home was never in the coordinates. And then he was gone. The mirrors outside dimmed one by one, folding back into darkness. The universe exhaled. Morty broke the silence. Rick, are we really just echoes? Rick pocketed the glass fragment. Kid with a noise between echoes. He looked down at his portal gun, its glow fading softly. Then, without a word, he set it on the floor of the ship. The metal rang once, like a bell marking the end of something sacred. Morty blinked. You're giving it up? Rick shrugged. Maybe. Maybe I'm just tired of chasing reflections. He walked to the viewport and stared out at the stars, which seemed to shimmer with a kind of gentle awareness, as if they'd been listening all along. Morty joined him. For the first time, there was no urgency, no chaos, no running. Just two travelers and an infinity that had finally stopped spinning. Rick whispered, almost to himself. You know what's funny, Morty? What? The smartest man in the universe just got taught serenity by his own reflection. Morty chuckled. Kind of poetic, huh? Rick nodded slowly. Yeah, kid. Real poetic. The hum of the ship softened into a lullaby of quiet machinery and sleeping light. Outside, the mirrors folded inward, leaving behind a single, steady star, glowing faintly in the dark, like the last thought before sleep. The next world they entered was made entirely of glass. Floating structures shimmered in a vast, dark sky, each shaped like a bottle, turning slowly, reflecting dim constellations that seemed too tired to shine. The portal behind them closed with a soft sigh, not a hiss or a spark, as if even the universe knew how to whisper here. Rick didn't look at Morty when he said, Don't touch anything. Morty, of course, immediately touched the air. It felt cool, heavy, and alive. Like the inside of a memory. What is this place? He asked. Rick scanned the horizon. A trade hub? Memory economy. You buy, sell, or borrow experiences. Like nostalgia with a price tag. Morty frowned. That's kind of messed up, Rick smirked. Yeah, which means it's profitable. They walked down a corridor made of transparent bridges, each leading to a floating stall. Behind the counters stood versions of beings from every imaginable timeline. Alien vendors, Ricks in aprons, Mortys with hollow eyes, Summers wrapped in light. Every one of them offered jars, tiny orbs of glass that glowed from within, each swirling with faint, living images. Whispers filled the air, soft and weightless. Each bottle hummed a tone, laughter, crying, rain, a song half remembered. It wasn't chaotic, it was tender, like the background noise of a universe remembering itself. Morty stopped by a stall labelled Firsts and Lasts. The vendor, an older version of himself, smiled gently. "You looking for something lost or something you haven't lived yet?" he asked. Morty blinked. "Wait, you're me?" The older Morty nodded. "Most people here are. We trade what we can't carry anymore," Rick grunted. "Cute. Existential capitalism." Morty picked up a jar labelled "The Day Evil Morty Laughed for Real." Inside,
He saw a flicker of light, a boy on a hill, laughing with genuine joy as the sun bent around him.
it wasn't cruel or clever. It was innocent. He whispered, "He was
Happy? The vendor nodded.
once, before he realized what the system had made him." Rick's gaze flickered. "Before I made him." The vendor looked at Rick. "You didn't make him, old man. You inspired him."
That's worse. Rick frowned, but said nothing.
He turned away, scanning the shelves. He found one labeled "The First Joke Ever Told." The image inside was small and human. Two primitive beings under a firelight, one slipping, the other laughing, then helping him up. Rick smirked faintly. Guess laughter really was the universe's first repair protocol. Morty looked up. "What does that mean?" "Means jokes are just emotional gravity. They pull broken things back together for a second." Morty smiled faintly.
That's kind of nice. They wandered further.
The market pulsed with low music, not mechanical, but heart-like. Rick stopped before a dusty stall with a sign that read, "Things You Forgot to Feel." Behind the counter stood a vendor who wasn't anyone at all, just a shimmer of light in human shape. It gestured wordlessly toward a single jar glowing pale blue. Morty lifted it gently. "What's inside?" Rick's voice was quiet. "Recognition. The moment you realize someone truly sees you." He stared at it unblinking. "Haven't seen one of those in years." Morty looked at him, not judging, just seeing. Rick noticed. The shimmer smiled as if approving. Rick reached into his coat, pulled out a small metallic sphere, one of his earliest inventions. He placed it on the counter. Trade. The shimmer accepted it. The jar glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed to a calm heartbeat pulse. Morty asked, "You keeping it?" Rick shook his head. "No, borrowing it." They kept walking. A few stalls later, Morty found one labeled "Shared Memories, 2 souls only." Inside the jar, he saw 2 figures laughing on a porch under alien skies. He leaned closer. It was him and Rick, younger, happier. Morty swallowed.
I don't remember this. Rick leaned in.
That's because it hasn't happened yet. They both stood there for a while, watching themselves laugh, their future selves framed in the warm glow of a sunset. The scene shimmered, peaceful, distant. Morty whispered, "Do you think we'll ever get there?" Rick didn't answer. He just watched. The reflection in the jar was enough of a maybe. Then something unexpected happened. A small jar on the neighboring shelf began to vibrate softly, glowing with golden light. Its label was smudged, but Morty could read a few words. Evil Morty, when he was kind. Morty's breath caught. "Rick, look." Rick hesitated, then picked up the jar carefully. The glow touched his face, and for an instant he looked years younger. Inside, Evil Morty walked through a field of light, helping a smaller Morty to his feet. There was no bitterness, no plan, and just an act of kindness, pure and fleeting. Morty's eyes welled.
I didn't know he could be like that. Rick said nothing.
He opened the jar slightly, letting the memory hum through the air. a faint note of music, like a lullaby with no words. They both listened. When the sound faded, Rick sighed. I guess even villains get their moments. Morty smiled softly. Maybe he wasn't a villain at all. Rick looked at him, eyes tired but warm.
Maybe none of us are.
Just versions trying to remember who we were before we started labeling ourselves. They left the stall without buying anything else. The jars around them shimmered quietly, as if bowing farewell. The bridge beneath their feet carried them back toward the portal bay, though neither of them remembered walking there. The market was already fading into the kind of dream you can't tell apart from memory. Morty turned once more. "Do you think we'll forget this?" Rick shrugged. "Probably, but the forgetting's part of the charm." They stepped through the portal. Behind them, the memory market continued to turn, slow and luminous, bottles drifting like stars, each one holding a story, a laugh, a tear, a single moment that once mattered enough to keep, and in the silence between them, a single jar flickered, the one they'd opened together. Its label rewrote itself in soft gold letters, forgiveness shared by two travelers. That night, Morty dreamed, if it could still be called night or dream or even him. The ship drifted through a region of faint blue mist, a space so still that sound forgot to exist. Rick had fallen asleep in his chair, head tilted back, the faint light of a half-drained flask glimmering in his hand. Morty watched him for a moment. The hum of the engines was soft and regular, like the heartbeat of a sleeping star. He turned toward the window. Outside, reality was liquid, clouds of silver folded into spirals, starlight dripping like dew, and somewhere deep in that glimmering quiet, Morty felt something stir. A memory, not his own, calling softly. A voice, both near and impossibly far. "You don't have to run any more." Then, without warning, a single tear welled in his eye. It hung there for a long moment, trembling, then fell. The instant it touched the floor, it didn't break. It expanded, the tear became a droplet of light, and within it, stars were born. Galaxies curved outward like petals, nebulae breathing in slow rhythm. The reflection of Morty's face appeared across 1,000 constellations, each one older, wiser, quieter. He whispered, "Rick."
Are you seeing this?
But Rick didn't move. His chest rose and fell steadily, as though the dream had taken him too. Morty leaned closer to the glowing sphere. It hovered in the air now, humming like a lullaby. And then from within the tiny universe, a shape appeared. A figure standing on the edge of a star. Evil Morty. Not as the sharp-eyed, vengeful version Morty remembered, but older. His hair faintly silvered, his posture relaxed. He looked up, smiling softly. When he spoke, his voice carried through the light like music underwater. "Hey, Morty." Morty blinked, stunned.
You're inside my tear?
Evil Morty chuckled. "Guess I finally made it into your heart. Not bad, huh?" Morty's laugh was small, fragile.
You're not angry?
Evil Morty shook his head slowly.
I got tired of being angry. Anger's just fear that forgot how to cry, Morty swallowed. So this is you?
"The real you. This is what's left when the universe stops needing me to fight it," he said. His eyes shimmered with light, not fire. Turns out infinity gets heavy. Somebody's got to put it down sometimes. Morty knelt, hands trembling, trying to take in the impossible scene. Galaxies, pulsing like living things, a reflection of peace born from sorrow.
I don't understand, he whispered. I thought you wanted to destroy everything. Evil Morty's smile didn't fade.
No, kid. I just wanted to see what it looked like when everything stopped trying to be perfect. The light around him deepened, stars dimming into soft gold.
You and Rick?
You keep running because you think stopping means losing. But it's the other way around. Resting is the only way the story learns to breathe. Morty felt tears again, heavier this time.
You sound like him. Evil Morty tilted his head.
Which one? Rick, Morty said quietly. Why, Rick, Evil Morty smiled. Then maybe he's learning. He looked upward, and Morty followed his gaze. In the small, floating universe, there was no ceiling, only layers of translucent light. Within one of them, Morty could see a reflection of Rick, not the man sleeping beside him, but a younger one, laughing, free. It hurt to look at, the kind of hurt that feels like remembering happiness after forgetting it too long. Evil Morty reached out. You've got a choice, you know.
Every Morty does, Morty frowned.
What kind of choice? The one between carrying someone else's pain or forgiving them enough to drop it. Morty looked down. But if I forgive him, what if he doesn't change? Evil Morty's expression softened. Then you still change. And that's enough. The galaxy pulsed again, each star flickering in time with Morty's heartbeat. He could feel himself breathing slower now, as if the whole scene had been waiting for him to match its rhythm. Why are you showing me this? He asked. Evil Morty's form began to fade into starlight. Because you were the only one who ever looked at me and saw a person instead of a theory. Morty's eyes widened.
Wait, don't go. Morty, he said softly, there's no evil version of me.
There's only the version that refused to forget. Forget what? That we were once kind. The light brightened suddenly, flooding the ship's interior with a golden glow. Rick stirred in his chair, squinting against it. Morty, what the hell? What you touch now? Morty turned, tears streaking down his cheeks, but smiling faintly.
Rick, he was here. Evil Morty, he said there's no evil version.
Just the one that remembers, Rick blinked, rubbing his eyes. Yeah, sure, kid.
Must have been a dream. But when he looked at the floor, he froze.
The small sphere of light still hovered there, rotating slowly, galaxies blooming inside like petals opening to the sun. And for just a moment, before logic had the chance to shut it down, Rick's face softened into awe. He whispered, Morty.
What did you do?
Morty shook his head.
I didn't do anything. I just
cried. Rick studied the tiny universe and saw, in its center, two faint silhouettes walking side by side, one old, one young, both laughing quietly. He recognized himself and Morty together. He felt something he hadn't felt in centuries, a strange, impossible calm, like being forgiven by a star. The light dimmed gently, folding back into a single droplet, then vanished into Morty's palm. All that remained was warmth and silence. For a long time, they just sat there.
No words, no science.
Only the soft hum of their shared quiet. Morty finally spoke. Rick, do you ever think maybe the universe cries for us too? Rick let out a small, tired laugh. If it does, kid, it's got good reason, Morty smiled. Maybe that's how it keeps creating new worlds. Rick looked out the window, at the endless dark, now dotted with faint new stars. Maybe, he murmured, maybe creation's just the universe learning to weep in peace. The ship drifted on, steady and slow. Behind them, somewhere in the folds of space, a single teardrop floated, still glowing softly, holding within it a small, quiet galaxy that no one would ever name, and in its center, two tiny figures sat beneath an endless dawn, watching everything turn gentle again. Rick sat alone in the cockpit, long after Morty had fallen asleep. The ship's interior lights were dim, flickering faintly against the curve of empty bottles scattered on the console. Outside, the cosmos drifted, slow, patient, endless. He stared into it as though it might stare back. For years, he'd treated the universe like a puzzle that owed him an answer. Every planet visited, every reality burned through, every version of himself he'd met. It was all supposed to lead somewhere. But tonight, with the afterglow of Morty's tear-born galaxy still haunting the room, Rick felt something strange, the unbearable quiet of understanding. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and exhaled. His breath fogged the glass in front of him, fading like a ghost. "What are you doing, old man?" he muttered. "Still chasing meaning in a system that doesn't give a damn about you?" The stars offered no reply. They just shone, indifferent, eternal, unbothered by regret. A soft shuffle came from behind. Morty had wandered in, eyes half-lidded with sleep. "You're still up?" Rick didn't turn around. "You were dreaming again. Heard you muttering something about universes crying."
"You're getting poetic on me, kid." Morty smiled faintly and sat beside him.
"It's not poetry. It's just the way things felt." "Feelings," Rick scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction.
"They're just chemical lies the brain tells itself to feel important." "Yeah," Morty said softly.
"But sometimes lies are all we've got left." Rick looked at him then, really looked. Morty's face had changed. Not older, not exactly, but steadier, as though he'd crossed some invisible distance Rick never managed to. The kid was quiet now, but not afraid. "Rick," Morty began, "what were you like before?"
"All this? Before portals, before the science, before the running?"
Rick chuckled, low and bitter. "I was curious, dumb, thought if I mapped enough universes I'd find one where I actually liked myself. And..." Rick smirked, though his eyes betrayed him. "Didn't find it?" Morty leaned back, staring out at the streak of nebulae beyond the glass. "Maybe it's not out there," Rick snorted. "You've been reading cosmic fortune cookies now."
"No," Morty said. "I've just been watching you."
"You build whole worlds out of equations, but you never build a moment for yourself." Rick wanted to respond, but the words stayed lodged somewhere between his ribs. Morty had a way of doing that, dropping a truth so gentle it felt like a knife wrapped in velvet. He reached for his flask, hesitated, then set it down again.
"You think it's that simple, huh? Just stop hating yourself."
Morty shrugged. "It's harder than building a portal gun, but maybe worth it." For a long time, they sat without speaking. The stars moved in slow arcs, and the faint hum of the ship seemed to blend with the rhythm of their breathing. Finally, Rick broke the silence.
"You know, when I lost Diane, I told myself I'd become a machine. Easier that way."
No pain, no memories, no ghosts. Morty's eyes softened. "But machines rust, Rick." That landed harder than Rick wanted it to. He rubbed his temples. "You're getting too good at this emotional crap." Morty smiled, half asleep. "Maybe I learned from the best." Rick snorted again, but this time it almost sounded like a laugh. "Kid, if I'm the best, the multiverse is doomed." Morty closed his eyes, sinking deeper into his seat. "You keep saying that. But every time something tries to destroy you, you still choose to live." Rick looked at him, puzzled. "What's your point?" "My point is," Morty murmured, his voice fading, "maybe living is just another kind of apology." That sentence hung in the air like a star that refused to die. Rick turned it over in his mind, hearing the echoes of every version of himself who'd ever run from something they couldn't fix. After a while, Morty drifted fully into sleep. His head tilted against the glass, mouth slightly open, like a kid who still dreamed of simpler universes. Rick watched him and saw, in that reflection, the ghost of who he might have been if he'd never broken everything he loved. A father, a friend,
A man who could have stayed. He felt the sting of something old rise in his throat.
For a moment he let it. No distractions, no equations, no escape hatch. Just the raw ache of being alive. He reached for the console, typed a few coordinates, and brought up an old holographic map. One marked with hundreds of glowing red X's. Each one represented a reality he'd left behind. Failed experiments, collapsed timelines, abandoned versions of himself, all the places where he'd chosen to run. Rick stared at them, then slowly began erasing the marks one by one. "Not going to chase you anymore," he whispered.
You win. When the last X disappeared, the screen filled with soft white light. Blank, pure, open. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closing for the first time in what felt like centuries.
The silence felt different now, not empty, but vast, forgiving. Behind him, Morty stirred in his sleep, murmuring something about home. Rick looked at him and said quietly, "Yeah, kid, maybe it's time." He reached over, pulled a blanket from the back of the chair, and draped it gently over Morty's shoulders. Then, without a word, he adjusted the ship's course toward a quiet sector, one unmarked on any map. Stars drifted past in soft silver trails. The universe didn't seem so cruel tonight. Rick sat back, the hum of the engine steady, and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about how to escape, he was thinking about how to stay. Outside, in the deep folds of space, a faint light flickered, the last glimmer of the tear-born universe, still watching, still waiting, and somewhere within it, the echoes of two Ricks, the one who forgot and the one who remembered, finally began to overlap, until they were indistinguishable. Maybe this was what peace sounded like. Not a bang, not a discovery, just a sigh, a long, quiet sigh that could carry across eternity. The ship slipped through the thinning fabric of space, emerging into a realm that shimmered like a memory half remembered. There was no sound, only the soft murmur of light drifting across an endless black sea. And then, as the mist cleared, Morty saw it. A planet glowing faintly beneath them, scattered with countless golden dots, each one flickering like a heartbeat. Rick squinted through the viewport. "Lanterns," he muttered.
Thousands of them.
Whole planet lit up like a candle vigil for the multiverse. They landed on the surface, the ground soft and dark, as if made of powdered starlight. Above them, the air shimmered, warm, weightless, and the lanterns floated slowly upward, carried by invisible currents. Each one pulsed with a different color, a different rhythm. Morty stepped closer to one. Inside the glassy shell, he saw images shifting like reflections on water. A young Morty laughing, another crying, another holding a portal gun far too big for his hands. The lantern hummed gently, the sound halfway between a sigh and a lullaby. "Rick," he whispered, These
are memories." Rick bent down beside another, his expression unreadable.
Yeah, looks like every Morty that ever existed left a piece of himself here.
Maybe a last thought before the light went out. Morty touched the lantern and flinched, not from pain, but from recognition.
Inside, he saw himself back at the Citadel, glaring at a wall of infinite Ricks, and behind him, faintly, the outline of Evil Morty, eyes calm, gaze steady.
As if waiting for this moment to return. Rick stood motionless,
staring at a different lantern, one that pulsed, faintly blue.
"This one's mine," he murmured. Morty approached carefully.
"Yours?" Rick nodded, his voice soft. "It's from the first universe I destroyed. I remember that shade of light, cold, exact, unforgiving." He reached out, and the lantern responded, glowing brighter, showing the reflection of a younger Rick, hair unkempt, eyes filled with that dangerous spark of pride. A man who thought he could outsmart loss itself. Morty didn't know what to say. He only watched as Rick turned away from it, shoulders heavy. "Guess I built my own graveyard," Rick muttered. "Didn't even know it." They walked slowly through the field of floating lights. Each lantern told its own story. Some beautiful, some unbearable, One showed a Morty teaching a class of alien children. Another, a Morty sitting beside a dying planet, whispering to himself. A few were completely dark, extinguished long ago, forgotten by every version that came after. The air was warm and fragrant, like burnt honey and static electricity. Time didn't move here. It drifted, like dust in slow motion. Morty looked up at the sky. More lanterns rose, disappearing into the black, joining a thin ring of light around the planet's edge. "They're leaving," he said quietly. Rick followed his gaze. "No, they're remembering." He pointed toward the horizon. Far away, one lantern shone brighter than the rest. Not gold or blue, but white.
Pure, steady, impossibly bright. Morty's chest tightened. "That one, that's his, isn't it?"
Rick nodded.
Evil Morty, the kid who broke the loop. Without another word, they started toward it. It took hours to reach.
The closer they came, the more the air seemed to hum. Not with menace, but with something gentler. The gravity softened. Every step felt like walking through a dream that didn't want to end. Finally, they stood before the lantern. It floated just above the ground, spinning slowly, its light reflecting across Rick's face.
Inside was no image, only a single glowing note, suspended in air.
Like a letter written in starlight, Morty swallowed hard and read it aloud. "I found peace at the edge of everything." He stared at the words, his voice trembling.
He wasn't lying, was he?
Rick didn't answer at first. He was staring into the glow, seeing more than Morty could. Equations fading into symbols, infinite loops collapsing into stillness. For once the light didn't look like data.
It looked like forgiveness. Guess not, Rick said finally.
Kid went farther than any of us ever did. Morty watched him, eyes reflecting the glow. "You think he's gone?" Rick tilted his head, as if listening to the hum beneath the air.
"No one's ever really gone. We just..."
Change frequencies. They stood there in silence for a long time. The lantern pulsed softly between them, its light spilling across their faces, painting them in gentle gold. Morty finally spoke. "You know, I used to hate him."
"Evil Morty? I thought he wanted to destroy everything." Rick chuckled quietly.
"Maybe he did. But maybe that's what freedom looks like when you've been trapped too long." The lantern drifted upward. Slowly, gracefully, it began to rise, joining the thousands above.
Morty reached out instinctively, but Rick stopped him. "Let it go," he said.
"He earned it." They watched until the light disappeared into the dark, merging with the ring of distant glow around the planet's edge. When it was gone, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was soft, full, alive. Morty exhaled, eyes closed. "It's beautiful here." "Yeah," Rick said. "A place like this shouldn't exist, but it does. A cemetery for infinite souls."
"And somehow it feels like home." Morty looked at him, smiling faintly.
"So what now?" Rick looked around, his eyes reflecting 1,000 flickering lights.
"Now we rest for a bit."
"Then we keep moving. Not because we're running, because we can," Morty nodded. "And if we get lost again?" Rick smirked. "Then maybe getting lost is the point." They sat down on the dark soil, shoulders almost touching, watching the lanterns drift higher and higher. The hum of the planet surrounded them, a low, soothing vibration that could have been the heartbeat of the cosmos itself. For once, Rick didn't reach for his flask. He just closed his eyes and let the sound wash through him. Morty whispered, "Do you think he's happy out there?" Rick opened one eye.
"I think..." He finally stopped trying to be, and in that strange answer,
Morty understood. Above them, the lanterns continued to rise, folding into constellations that had never existed before. Stories written by every version of them that had ever dared to hope. Rick and Morty sat beneath the glow, two small figures under an infinite sky, watching their own history drift away. not as punishment, but as release. The lanterns faded behind them as they drifted back into the silent dark. The ship hummed softly, not the usual restless buzz of machinery, but something steadier, almost like a breath finally slowing down after years of running. Rick sat in the pilot's chair, eyes distant, staring into nothing. Morty leaned against the window, watching the last traces of gold dissolve into the void. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, filled with a quiet understanding that didn't need words. Then a soft flicker appeared on the ship's console. Not an alert,
Not a warning.
just a pulse of faint blue light, rhythmic and patient. Morty frowned.
Rick.
We got company? Rick squinted, adjusting the dial.
Nah, it's...
Something else. The light pulsed again, slower this time, then formed into a thin beam stretching out into the darkness ahead. Without a word, Rick followed it. They emerged into a place where the sky looked fractured, shards of glass reflecting infinite worlds. The air shimmered like a mirage, and standing in the middle of it, calm and unafraid, was Evil Morty. He looked older, not by years, but by the way his shoulders carried stillness instead of tension. His yellow shirt was dimmed, his eye patch gone. His eyes, once sharp and filled with anger, were now simply tired. Morty stepped forward. "It's really you," Evil Morty smiled faintly.
It's one of me.
"Maybe the last one that matters." Rick didn't move. His expression stayed somewhere between suspicion and recognition. The look of a man meeting his reflection in another life. "So," Rick said softly, "you finally did it. The grand plan?"
The end of infinity.
All the Rick's gone quiet. Evil Morty tilted his head. Not gone, just resting. The noise had to stop eventually. Rick gave a slow nod.
You figured out what I never did. Evil Morty walked closer.
"You mean that cleverness isn't the same as peace?" Rick smirked, but it didn't last long. "Yeah, something like that." They stood facing each other. Two versions of the same soul split across eternity. The space between them shimmered with faint light, like the air was remembering everything they had done, everything they had broken, and everything they had lost. Morty watched, unsure whether to speak. He could feel something ancient in the silence. Not anger, not regret, but recognition. Rick broke it first. "So what now? You call us here to rub it in? Show us your retirement home for tired geniuses?" Evil Morty's smile deepened slightly. "No, I called you because I wanted you to see it. The stillness. The thing you've been running from your entire life." Rick frowned. "Stillness doesn't solve anything."
It's just empty, is it?
Evil Morty asked. "Or is it what comes after everything that's been said?" Rick's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked away, and for the first time, Morty saw something rare in his eyes. Not anger, not sarcasm, but the ache of truth finding its way in. Morty spoke softly. "So what was your plan, really? What's the bigger picture?" Evil Morty turned to him, eyes calm as deep water.
To end the cycle.
"To let every version of us rest.
Every Rick, every Morty, trapped in loops of pain, genius, regret. I didn't want to destroy the multiverse, Morty. I wanted to set it free." Rick let out a quiet laugh, but it wasn't mocking. It was almost sad.
"So your big plan wasn't domination?" "It was a damn bedtime story," Evil Morty chuckled, the sound surprisingly warm. "Sleep is underrated." Rick studied him carefully.
You really believe they can just... Stop! Evil Morty's gaze softened.
"Maybe not all at once. But when you stop fighting the noise, the silence starts to make sense."
That's how it begins. Morty felt something stir in his chest, a strange mix of sorrow and peace. And what about you? He asked.
"What happens to you now?" Evil Morty looked up at the fractured sky.
I'll fade, I guess. Not die, just...
"Dissolve into what's left. Maybe become part of the hum between the stars," Rick sighed. "You sound like a poet." "Maybe I am," Evil Morty said. "Maybe we all are. once we run out of equations? For a long time, the three of them stood there, surrounded by the quiet shimmer of dying realities. The air smelled faintly of ozone and memory. Then Evil Morty looked at Rick, not with hatred, but with something close to forgiveness. "You were my origin, you know. Every version of me was born trying to escape you." Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know." Evil Morty stepped closer until they were only a few feet apart.
But I don't hate you anymore.
"You built a cage because you were afraid of losing meaning."
I broke it because I was afraid of never finding any. Rick looked up, his expression softening.
"Guess we both overcompensated." That earned a faint smile. "Guess so." Morty's voice broke the silence. "So what do we do now?" Evil Morty looked at him with almost parental gentleness. "You live, Morty. You live without trying to win." Rick chuckled under his breath. "You mean the bigger plan was just to get everyone to chill?" Evil Morty smiled. "Finally you get it." The words hung in the air like a lullaby. Morty felt the world begin to blur, the colors softening around the edges.
Evil Morty's outline began to fade, dissolving into the fractured light. "Wait," Morty began, but Evil Morty raised a hand. "It's all right. You'll see me again, just not like this. Every time you stop running, every time you look at the stars and don't try to explain them, that's where I'll be." Rick's voice was barely a whisper.
"Goodbye, kid," Evil Morty smiled one last time. "Goodbye, old man." And then he was gone, not vanished, not destroyed, but absorbed into the stillness he had created. The light around them dimmed to a soft twilight glow, wrapping the ship in calm. Rick stood there for a long moment, eyes fixed on the empty space where Evil Morty had been. Morty stepped closer.
"Rick, are you okay?"
Rick gave a half smile. "For the first time in a while, yeah, maybe." They turned back toward the ship. The fractured sky slowly mended behind them, leaving only a single, gentle star shining in the dark, as if the universe itself had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. As they lifted off, Morty whispered, "He wasn't evil, was he?" Rick looked out the window.
"No, Morty, he was just
tired," and the ship drifted on, through the soft hum of infinity, quieter now, calmer, like a lullaby that had finally found its last note. The ship floated through a stretch of calm space, not black, not empty, but soft and dim, filled with drifting motes of pale light. Each one shimmered like a sleeping thought, suspended between waking and forgetting. The hum of the engines was quieter now, almost reverent. Rick sat at the console, not tinkering for once, just staring into the quiet expanse. Morty leaned back in his seat, his gaze lost in the stars. The silence between them was peaceful, but it wasn't quite rest. It was the kind of silence that comes before a choice, the moment when the soul decides which road it's willing to take. He had dreamed the night before. Not a nightmare, not one of the chaotic flashes that used to chase him through sleep. This one had been different, warm, slow. He had walked through a field of faintly glowing grass, and at the horizon stood a door. Simple, wooden, with light leaking from the edges like dawn waiting to arrive. Evil Morty's voice had echoed from somewhere unseen. "It's not an ending. It's a return." When he woke, the feeling stayed. Rick noticed. "You've been quiet, kid." Usually means something's brewing in that noggin. Morty hesitated.
"Yeah, I think he left something for me."
"Not a message, more like a feeling," Rick grunted softly, folding his arms. "Feelings. The last frontier of things I can't fix with a wrench." Morty smiled faintly. He said there'd be a door, a way out.
"One life, no portals, no loops, just one life." Rick didn't look surprised.
"Figures. Kid breaks the infinite treadmill just to offer you an off-ramp." Morty turned toward him. "Would you take it?" Rick was quiet for a long time. The hum of the ship filled the space where words should have been. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, honest.
I don't know.
Part of me thinks the multiverse is my punishment. The other part thinks it's my playground. Maybe they're the same thing? Morty looked back at the stars.
I think I'm just tired of being a copy.
Every Morty out there is a reflection of something Rick did or didn't do.
I want to know who I am when no one's looking. Rick didn't answer.
He reached over, typed something into the console, and a shimmer appeared in front of the ship. A door-shaped distortion hanging in the void. Simple, wooden, exactly like the one from Morty's dream. Light spilled gently from its edges. There, Rick said. You found your door. Morty's breath caught.
You did that?
Rick shrugged. Didn't make it. Just tuned into it.
It's real, Morty. The universe, or what's left of it, wants you to decide. The ship drifted closer.
The door stood silently in the dark, impossibly still, like it had been waiting for them for centuries. Morty rose from his seat. His knees felt light, his heartbeat slow. If I go through? He asked softly. What happens to you? Rick kept his eyes on the door. Doesn't matter.
I've had plenty of Mortys.
Maybe it's time one of them got free. Morty stared at him, unsure whether to be angry or grateful. You mean that? Rick's lips twitched.
Kid, if I didn't, I'd have already pulled you back. The ship settled to a stop.
The hum faded into silence. Only the door remained, glowing softly, humming like a memory that wanted to be remembered. Morty walked toward it. Each step felt like walking through the pages of his own story. Every adventure, every scream, every laugh echoing behind him. When he reached it, he lifted his hand and placed it on the surface. It was warm, like sunlight through wood. On the other side, he could almost hear waves, birds, the sound of wind through trees.
A place that wasn't infinite, but enough. Rick stood behind him, watching.
Whatever's out there, he said quietly. It won't be perfect, but it'll be yours. Morty turned. His eyes glistened faintly in the glow.
You could come with me. Rick shook his head slowly.
Nah, doors like that don't open for people like me. Someone's got to keep the lights on in the void. Morty smiled weakly. You're just saying that so you don't have to get emotional, Rick snorted. Emotional's just another word for bad plumbing, but his voice had softened, and Morty heard what he didn't say. The boy turned back to the door. His hand lingered on it. The light pulsed gently beneath his palm, like a heartbeat sinking to his own.
He could step through.
He could have the life he never got. Mornings that weren't rushed, evenings that weren't haunted, dreams that didn't hurt. He closed his eyes.
If I go, he whispered, will you be okay?
Rick sighed.
I've survived worse.
Hell, I've survived myself. Morty stood there for another moment. Then, slowly he turned the handle. The door creaked open, and beyond it lay a sky painted with sunset. Gentle orange light spilled through, wrapping him in warmth. He stared at it for a long time, his heart heavy and light all at once. Then he smiled. Not yet, he said softly. He closed the door. The light dimmed. Rick raised an eyebrow. Changed your mind? Morty nodded. You still need me. Someone's got to make sure you don't replace your liver with a fusion core or something. Rick chuckled. That's fair. The door lingered for a moment longer, then began to fade, its glow dissolving into the quiet starlight. Morty watched it go without regret. When it vanished, he turned back to Rick. You think it'll be there if I ever want it again? Rick leaned back in his chair. Doors like that don't disappear, Morty. They just wait. They sat in silence as the ship drifted forward, stars sliding past like slow thoughts. Morty leaned his head against the glass, and for the first time in a long time, the infinite didn't feel so big. Rick adjusted a few knobs, then paused. You did good, kid, Morty smiled faintly.
You too, Rick? The stars outside pulsed gently, like they were breathing with them.
Somewhere far away, in the endless folds of space, a faint hum echoed. the sound of a universe learning to rest. They didn't speak again for the rest of the night. They didn't need to, and in the quiet that followed, the ship drifted on, carrying not heroes, not fugitives, but two souls finally learning how to stay. The night that followed felt endless, but not in the way space usually did. It wasn't cold or infinite. It was still like the universe itself had chosen to exhale. The ship drifted silently through the shimmer of distant galaxies, the stars dimming one by one, as if lowering their light to give them privacy. Morty slept for the first time in days. His breathing was slow, his face relaxed, untroubled. Rick watched from across the cabin, sitting in the pilot's chair with a half-empty flask resting on the console. He hadn't touched it. For once he didn't need to. The ship's hum was low and steady, almost like a lullaby. Every now and then, the navigation lights blinked softly against the glass, painting Rick's reflection in alternating shades of blue and gold. He stared at it, at himself, at the faint lines around his eyes, and thought about the door that had appeared for Morty. It hadn't been a hallucination. The readings were real. Space itself had bent, formed something gentle, something deliberate, a cosmic invitation. And for a brief moment, he'd wondered what it would be like to have one of those doors waiting for him. He laughed under his breath, the sound small and tired. "What would I even do in a perfect world?" he muttered. "Probably break it in 10 minutes. Outside the window, a slow current of light drifted by, a stream of cosmic dust, glowing faintly violet. It was the residue of a dying star traveling across eternity to find its place. Rick adjusted the ship to follow it, coasting gently in its wake. Hours passed in silence, or maybe it was days. Time lost its usual meaning here. When Morty finally stirred, the first thing he saw was that faint river of starlight outside. "Where are we?" he asked sleepily, rubbing his eyes. Rick didn't look away from the stars.
Nowhere, everywhere, the in-between, Morty blinked, sitting up.
"That's supposed to mean something?" Rick gave a small grin. "Only to people who care about words." "You dream?" Morty hesitated. "Yeah, but it wasn't like before."
I didn't see Evil Morty or doors or anything.
"I was standing in the middle of this field again, same one from before. But this time I wasn't alone. There were other versions of me, all of us just watching the sky."
Nobody talking, nobody fighting.
"Just standing there," Rick nodded slowly. "Guess the multiverse finally learned to shut up for a minute." Morty smiled faintly. "Yeah, it was nice." They drifted quietly for a while longer. The river of dust curved ahead, leading toward a faint flicker. A station, old and broken, floating at the edge of a forgotten cluster. Its hull was scarred, but its lights still glowed weakly, like a memory refusing to fade. Rick angled the ship closer. "Looks abandoned. Perfect place to recharge." When they landed, the platform creaked beneath the ship's weight. The air inside the station was thin but breathable. The corridors were dim, lined with cracked panels and dormant screens. Dust hung like fog in the low gravity. Morty followed close behind as Rick led the way, flashlight in hand.
"What is this place?"
"Used to be an observation post," Rick said, brushing his hand over a control panel. "A part of the old Galactic Federation monitoring network.
Long before your time.
They used to watch for anomalies, black holes, tears, cosmic drift. Then they realized they were watching the end of everything and just stopped showing up." Morty glanced around. "You mean they just left?" "Yeah," Rick replied.
Everyone does eventually. He powered up one of the main terminals.
The screen flickered to life, showing a map of nearby sectors. Most were marked in red, collapsed, abandoned, unreachable. Only one area still pulsed faintly in green, a small cluster labeled Zone A7 Theta, origin point unverified. Morty leaned closer. "Origin point? What's that supposed to mean? Rick squinted.
Could be anything.
Could be the last stable fragment of the first universe.
Could be a typo. Morty studied the glow on the screen.
Let's check it out. Rick hesitated. It's probably a dead end. Morty smiled softly.
So was I once. Rick stared at him, then let out a quiet laugh. You've been hanging around me too long, Morty. They left the station an hour later, thrusters firing gently as they ascended back into the quiet dark.
The stars ahead shimmered faintly like a promise. Rick set a slow course toward Zone A7 Theta, letting the autopilot take over. The two sat in silence, watching the darkness move around them. After a while, Morty spoke.
Do you think there's actually a beginning? Like one point where all this started?
Rick tilted his head. Maybe. Or maybe beginnings are just endings we haven't recognized yet. Morty nodded, his gaze drifting. Feels weird, doesn't it? Knowing the multiverse could just end.
All those versions of us, gone, Rick shrugged.
They're still here in some way.
Every time you remember them, every time you wonder about them, that's another version breathing for a second. Morty smiled faintly.
That's kind of beautiful, Rick. Rick smirked. Don't get sentimental on me, Morty. It's creepy, but there was warmth in his voice. The kind of warmth that sneaks in when no one's watching. As they drifted toward the unknown sector, something began to shimmer faintly ahead. A thin thread of light stretching across the void, vibrating gently. It looked like the spine of the universe, glowing from within. Morty leaned forward. Whoa, what is that? Rick's eyes narrowed.
That's not supposed to be here. The glow pulsed softly then again, like a heartbeat. Morty's chest tightened. Rick, I think it's calling us. Rick didn't answer.
He reached for the controls, his expression unreadable. The hum of the ship deepened as they drew closer, the thread of light growing brighter, wider, until it wasn't a line at all but a horizon, endless and luminous. Morty whispered, Is that the beginning? Rick didn't blink. No, Morty, that's the space between beginnings. The glow swallowed them whole, and for a moment the universe forgot to breathe. The light held them gently, neither hot nor blinding. It was a kind of warmth that didn't come from heat, but from recognition, as if the universe itself knew their names. For a moment, Rick and Morty felt weightless, unburdened, drifting within something that wasn't quite space and wasn't quite dream. Then the ship steadied, and the brightness faded into a silvery dusk. Outside the window stretched a vast ocean of slow-turning stars, folding in and out of themselves like the tide. Every world they'd ever touched, every dimension, every possibility, shimmered faintly, each one dimming at its own rhythm. Morty pressed a hand to the glass. It's beautiful, he whispered. Rick didn't respond at first. His eyes traced the horizon, the way constellations blinked and bent, the way light seemed to breathe. It was peaceful, yes, but it was also final, he exhaled. This isn't beauty, Morty, it's closure, Morty frowned. What do you mean? Rick leaned back in the pilot's chair. The multiverse, it's not dying exactly.
It's sleeping.
Every system, every law of physics, every particle, it's slowing down, like it's finally tired. Morty looked out again, watching a spiral galaxy fold into a single blue spark.
Do you think Evil Morty did this?
Rick shook his head.
No, he just started the process.
All he wanted was rest. The multiverse heard him and decided maybe it wanted the same thing. They fell silent, listening to the hum of the ship. Even that sound seemed quieter now, softer, like it was being absorbed into the fabric of space. Rick pulled a small device from his pocket. His portal gun. Its edges were cracked, its green light dim. He turned it over in his hands. Every version of me used one of these, he murmured. Every one of them thought they could run from themselves, and all it ever did was keep us awake longer. Morty looked at him.
You could fix it, right?
Rick gave a tired smile. Sure, but maybe I shouldn't. He set the portal gun on the console and looked out at the fading cosmos. You ever notice how quiet things get right before you fall asleep?
That weird floating feeling?
Morty nodded. That's what this is, Rick said softly. The multiverse. It's reaching that moment. The one where you stop trying to think and you just let go. For a long time, they sat together in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was sacred. Then far ahead, a faint glow began to rise, not from any star or planet, but from the void itself. It was golden soft, pulsing slowly, like a heart learning to beat again. Morty pointed. What's that? Rick squinted.
That's where Evil Morty went. They watched as the glow thickened, forming a shape, a silhouette of light standing still against the dark. Evil Morty, his yellow eye patch shimmered faintly, more symbolic now than real.
He didn't move. He didn't need to, Morty swallowed.
He's just
Standing there, Rick's voice softened.
He's not standing, Morty. He's becoming. Evil Morty's body dissolved into threads of gold, scattering like pollen through the void.
Each strand touched a star, and each star began to dim. Not extinguished, but folded, gently tucked away, as if the universe were putting itself to bed. Morty felt his chest tighten. Rick, he's really ending it. Rick shook his head. No, he's healing it. As they watched, the endless stream of portals that once crisscrossed reality, those swirling windows Rick had spent his life building, began to close. One by one, slowly, tenderly, each closure was a sigh, each fading portal a whisper of relief. The green spirals turned soft blue, then silver, then gone. The air around them grew calm, still. The ship's sensors started losing readings, first on gravity, then radiation, then light itself. Everything simplified, returned to quiet. Morty's voice trembled.
Rick, what happens when everything stops?
Rick looked at him, really looked, not as a project or a reflection, but as his equal. Then, kid, we rest. Just like he wanted. Morty leaned against his seat, eyes glistening.
You think we'll wake up again?
Rick smiled faintly.
I think that's up to us. They both turned back to the window.
The last remaining lights of creation blinked faintly, like distant fireflies refusing to fade. One by one, they folded into the soft gold haze that surrounded them. The hum of the ship slowed. The air felt heavier, more dreamlike. Rick reached out, adjusting one final control. Not to move, not to flee, but to keep the cabin warm. He looked over at Morty. You did good, kid. All the versions of you, they'd be proud. Morty smiled weakly. Even the dumb ones? Rick chuckled. Especially the dumb ones. They're the ones who kept believing in me. Morty closed his eyes, his breathing slow, his shoulders relaxing.
Feels like everything's fading, Rick. Yeah, Rick whispered.
That's how peace works.
You don't notice it until it's already got you. The ship drifted through the last breath of starlight.
Beyond the glass, the multiverse folded into itself, galaxies becoming single notes in a vast, cosmic lullaby, and somewhere deep in the silence,
a voice that wasn't a voice spoke, not to them, but through them. Rest now, it said.
You've done enough. Rick's head leaned back against the seat. His eyes fluttered shut. For the first time in forever, his mind was quiet. No equations, no regrets. Just the faint echo of a boy who once wanted to understand everything, finally realizing he didn't need to. Morty's hand drifted to the window, his fingers tracing the fading glow. Good night, Evil Morty, he whispered. Thanks for everything. The light pulsed once more, gentle, approving, before dimming entirely. The ship floated in the hush that followed, carried not by propulsion, but by memory. And in that weightless silence, where no universe remained to contain them, Rick whispered the last words anyone would speak before the infinite fell asleep. Maybe the smartest thing we ever did was stop trying to be awake. The ship floated in the quiet, weightless and still. There was no sense of direction anymore. No up, no down, no destination. Only the slow turning of light, the whisper of what had once been motion, and the hum of something ancient learning how to rest. Rick sat in the pilot's chair, his hands folded loosely in his lap. The portal gun lay on the console, dim and silent, a relic from a time that no longer existed. Its faint green light pulsed once every few minutes, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. Morty was beside him, wrapped in a blanket he'd found in one of the ship's old compartments. The fabric smelled like ozone and rain, memories of 1,000 storms they'd passed through together. His head rested against the window, eyes half open, watching the faint shimmer of what used to be stars. "It's weird," Morty said softly. "How something so big can end so quietly." Rick didn't answer right away. His voice, when it came, was rough but calm. Things only end loud when they're trying to be remembered.
The universe doesn't need that. It just...
Let's go. Outside, the last few stars faded into mist. For a heartbeat, everything was pure black. Then, slowly, a faint silver glow appeared. Not light exactly, but something deeper, something like memory remembering itself. Morty traced his finger along the window, drawing small circles that vanished instantly. "Do you think there's anyone left out there?" Rick shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't really matter anymore. What's left is what's meant to be left." A pause. "The kind that stretches but doesn't feel heavy." Morty turned to him.
You think we'll remember all this? The adventures, the worlds, Evil Morty, everything?
Rick smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a tired curve. "Only if we dream it again," Morty frowned. "Dream it again?" Rick leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes.
Yeah, kid.
Every dream is just a memory that wants to try again. Maybe that's what the multiverse really was. One big dream looping on itself until it got tired. Morty let out a small laugh. "Kinda sounds like you," Rick chuckled. "Yeah, maybe it does." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything they'd said, everything they hadn't, all the laughter and fear and strange, quiet affection that had woven itself between them over countless lifetimes. In the corner of the ship, a small panel flickered to life.
Not a warning. Not anymore.
Just a soft light, golden steady. It illuminated their faces like dawn through half-closed curtains. Morty turned toward it. "What's that?" Rick smiled faintly.
Just a nightlight.
"Keeps the dark from getting too lonely." Morty nodded. "Good idea." They watched the light together, the glow painting soft reflections across their eyes. After a while, Morty whispered, "Do you think Evil Morty found peace?" Rick took a slow breath.
I think he became it. The words lingered between them, weightless and true. Outside, the last remnants of matter drifted apart, dissolving into threads of luminescent dust.
Time itself began to loosen. Moments no longer lined up neatly, but floated, weaving in and out of one another like dreams, blending into each other before morning. Morty blinked, and for a second he thought he saw them, other versions of himself and Rick. Faint, transparent, like reflections in glass, each one resting in their own way, a Rick asleep on a rooftop, a Morty watching the sunset over a quiet planet, another pair walking hand in hand through a dimension made of color and silence. They weren't separate anymore. Every version of them, every possibility, was folding back into the same gentle origin. "Rick," Morty said quietly, "what happens now?" Rick's eyes stayed closed, but his voice was steady.
Now nothing.
"And that's the point," Morty smiled faintly.
I think I can live with that. Rick cracked one eye open.
"Good, because that's the first time you've ever said something smart without complaining." Morty laughed softly. Not his usual nervous laugh, but something lighter, freer. The sound echoed faintly in the cabin, filling the quiet with warmth. Rick's expression softened. You've come a long way, kid. Morty looked down, shy. Yeah, guess we both have. The nightlight flickered once, then steadied again. Outside, the silver mist began to settle, as though the universe were tucking itself in. The stars no longer shone. They glowed faintly from within, like thoughts gently fading at the edge of sleep. Morty closed his eyes.
Feels like everything's going to disappear, Rick whispered. Not disappear.
Just rest, and it did. The silence deepened, not in fear, but in peace. The kind of quiet that comes when everything that needed to be said has been said, and everything that needed to be forgiven has been forgiven. Morty drifted first. His breathing slowed, his shoulders softened. His last thought was of laughter. His, Rick's, and even Evil Morty's, tangled together in some eternal echo. Rick stayed awake a little longer, just long enough to make sure the boy was safe. He reached for the portal gun one last time, turning it over gently in his hand. The green light flickered, then dimmed completely. He set it beside Morty and looked out at the fading horizon. "Guess we finally figured it out, huh?" he murmured. "You can't outsmart peace." The silver mist drifted closer, wrapping around the ship like a blanket. Rick leaned back, closed his eyes, and let his mind go quiet. For the first time in all of existence, there were no versions left to chase, no universes to fix, no chaos to outrun.
Only stillness, only sleep. The ship floated on through nothing.
Through everything, until even motion became memory, and in the softest tone, like a lullaby carried on the edge of time itself, came the final words. "Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well."
Everything's going to be okay, man.